Isn't that amazing? Okay, so let's get going. So we learned this long Sif Bays yesterday, that if you're taking compensation, then you're allowed to take everything from the debtor, including those utensils that he uses to prepare his meals, provided that you just give him, provided that you give him what we do for a balchov, which is to make sure that he has food for 30 days and clothes for a year. Okay, let's take a look at Sif Yud Gimel. V'chol mi sheyesh lo yoser michadei sidur balcho ve'ena rotza litain muter lecha. Oh, sorry. Whoops. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, it is recording. V'chol mi sheyesh lo yoter michadei sidur balcho. If a debtor has more than what is fairly left for a debtor when we collect from him, ve'ena rotza litain, and he doesn't want to part with his assets. Let's say he says, my baseball card collection is too valuable to me, and I'm not willing to part with it. Muter lechaposo afilu al yedei haka. You're allowed to coerce him, and I don't believe that it's referring to the individual. As we'll see, the Imrei Yaakov says, the shliach beis din can coerce him. The creditor does not have a right to physically accost the guy. But the shliach beis din, once the shliach beis din has been given the right as the bailiff to confiscate his property, if the guy is refusing, so then you can physically manipulate him. Afilo al yedei haka, even through strikes. Ve'ein bazem mishum lo sihi lo kenosha, and there's no violation of do not be to him as an oppressor. Okay, v'gam ima shemashu lo ketei sidur balcho. Rashai litol mimenu biyom kli hatzarech lo b'layla uchseru b'layla v'litol kli hatzarech lo b'yom v'lasos kein lo. And even things that he needs for his livelihood, as long as you give it back to him during the time of day when he needs it, that can be done as well. So like for the Torah's example is taking his pajamas during the day and taking his plow at night. Today, sheyivakesh ma'os lifrolo. So to incentivize the fellow to find the wherewithal to finally pay back his debt. I don't know why he's repeating this. We've seen this multiple times. Below Amra Torah lo sielo kenosha ela kishenosha bo masha ein lo klal. The Torah's admonition that you cannot be an oppressor to him is when you know he doesn't have. But if you know that he has, then you are allowed to oppress. Beis din is allowed to oppress him. Uchishenotel b'toras piraon rashai shlich beis din likanes lebeso litel chafatzav avalo hamalva ba'atzma. So when it's being taken as collateral, the shliach beis din has to wait outside. But when he's taking it as payment, like to actually take the physical assets of the debtor as payment, the shliach beis din can actually invade his home. But that can only be done by the shliach beis din. It cannot be done by the creditor himself. Now, of course, this would not work in a modern beis din today. So it really doesn't have very much application. Okay, you can just imagine. I'm from the beis din. That's not a house call that you'd like to accept. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. You can even use physical strikes if necessary. Al yedei shliach beis din. Sheprias balchov mitzvah umakano soad shetetzei nafsho kedei lekaimo. Because the reason why the shliach beis din has a right to use physical force is because this is just like any other mitzvah, that beis din has the jurisdiction to strike someone if he doesn't wish to fulfill his obligation. V'yesh omrim dahainu gam heicha shirotza l'shalim rak shemadches hamayl b'leich v'shov. According to some opinions, this is true that we can even physically coerce a debtor, even in a situation where the debtor says, I promise I'm going to pay, but come back next month when I'll have the money. So we send Guido Yaakov from the Beis Din. We send the Guido from the Beis Din, and we tell him, shake him down. And he says, I promise I'll get you the money. You have until tomorrow morning, right? Just like in the movies. But he doesn't want to pay when the time of payment comes. He says, so that's when the shliach Beis Din, the guy says, I promise I'm going to pay. So that's when we say, okay, if he doesn't pay in a timely fashion, you can use physical force. Because if he has no intention of paying at all, as he says, I'm not paying this. I don't see why I should have to pay him. So over gam alav de lo sashok. So then he's kidleil siman zayin sif dalad ayin sham. Do not oppress your fellow, which is let's see. And he says, as a matter of fact, there are times when it is appropriate to imprison a debtor who refuses to pay his debts. If the Beis Din sees there's a need for this, because he falls into the category of a person who's trying to evade his financial obligations. In such a situation, Beis Din at their discretion can put someone in the stocks or in the prison. So back in the day, I suppose, I don't know of any documented cases in Jewish communities where there were prisons, but there were probably stocks, those, you put someone in the, that was probably done in many communities. I would imagine if there was a guy who was just not obeying what he was supposed to do. Only in the wild west of Poland, maybe. Yeah, right. Which would have ordered Eastern Europe. Kadeshi Yavakesh Mos. So that this is a way of incentivizing him to track down money so that he will eventually pay back. And he says, I refer you to the Biurim that I'm not really clear. He says there's reason to investigate this further. What is his issue over here? So he says, Divrei harav kan tzarich in lanias daiti, v'lechora inyan zakasha de'ein shari lasos kain. De'eich shari lasos kain. How is it permitted to do this? Harei ma'risha asu kvar lelo v'sidor balchov. V'lo hishiru lo beveso shum davar hamiyuchad lo. V'im kain eich mutter lasos pu'ula kedei lilchot zalav shi'yavakesh mos likfro alam. He says, you've taken everything the guy has except the bare minimum. How can you put more pressure on him by taking his items at night when he only needs them during the day and vice versa, as an incentive to pressure him? You're not even allowed to pass in front of him if you know he doesn't have the money. So the bottom line is that the way we are understanding it is that you might be able to put pressure on him to work harder or to get a job or an additional job. So that's the way we understood it in the past, but Rav Stern seems to feel that this is excessive.
Is he allowed to, at this point, his brothers to pay a loan?
There are many people who do that. There are people who go collecting tzedakah to pay back loans.
That's what we're encouraging you to do.
Yeah. I remember not too long ago, there was a guy who was here in Toronto who got in trouble with the Israeli mafia because he borrowed money. And he said, I can't go back to Israel until I collect money to pay back my debt. Otherwise, they're going to kill me. So, people gave. so that you could pay back. Okay, we're not going to spend time on this because this is not halacha lamaisa. We don't do this today. Okay, let us go on. Next halacha. B'chol zeh b'halva'a, aval b'chol v'acher kagon sochar behemto o kelev shayu muskarim etzlo, o sochar beso o sochar atzmo sheniskar etzlo. He says, all we've been speaking about up until now are the laws of loans. But if there's another kind of debt, so for example, Shimon rents Reuven's animal or his appliances, or they were leased out to him, o sochar beso, o sochar atzmo, or he hired or he rented out the guy's house, or he rented out his services, sheniskar etzlo, o demei gzelaso gnei baso. He says, or the guy stole and he owes the money. Mutar lemashkano be'atzmo shelo al pi beistin. So in all situations where a guy owes me money for services rendered, or I provided him with goods and he refuses to pay for them. So in all of those cases, this is not a question of owing money on a loan. This is, I serviced you, I provided you with goods, and now you're stiffing me. So in those situations, mutar lemashkano ba'atzmo shelo al pi beistin. You are allowed to confiscate his goods, even without a beistin representative. In other words, if you meet the guy in the shuk, you say, "Hey, look over there," and then you grab his animal and you ride off with it. That would be permissible because you're just collecting the debt that he owes you, not based on a loan. Even to walk into his house unannounced and to take his things is permitted, which sounds pretty wild. Yeah, because basically, if you tried to do this today, you would be thrown into jail to invade someone's private space. But if, however, you have an arrangement that the outstanding balance shall be a debt. In other words, you've turned it into a loan situation where, okay, I've given you 30 days to pay what you owe. You put the item on layaway, you purchased something from me on layaway. So now you owe me money in the form of a loan. So then it reverts back to the halachas that we were saying before. Shenemar masha'as me'uma. That because the pasuk says masha'as me'uma, which so what's that? What's the context of the pasuk over there? So give me 1 second. Here, it's a pasuk in Parshas Kiteitzei. Ki sashevere acha masha'as me'uma lo savo el beso la'avot avoto. And Rashi over there says, I'll just translate it. It's pasuk yud. When you lend your brother anything, you may not come into his house to fetch his pledge. That's what the words mashas me'uma means. In other words, even if, so anything, me'uma means any kind of debt. So that once you convert what he owes you into a debt, into a loan kind of situation, so then you cannot go into his house. V'chein ha'arev lamalva mutar likanes lebeis lamashkano, afilu hamalva atzmo. And similarly, ha'arev lamalva, that a person who is a guarantor of the loan, ha'arev lamilva, mutar likanes lebeis lamashkano, afilu hamilva atzmo, the imhu arev kablan dino kolova va'aser. Oh, I'm sorry. V'chein ha'arev lamalva. So I'm sorry. What it means is that if a person is a a guarantor on a loan, and the loan has not been paid. So the creditor has an advantage in collecting from a guarantor over the debtor himself. Whereas before we said a creditor is not allowed to enter into the house to collect the loan. He is allowed to enter the house of a guarantor to collect the loan from him. And he can even confiscate his items without permission. Yes. Yeah, even for a loan, even for a regular loan, I don't have a right to invade the lova's space without going to Beis Din. But if there's a guarantor, I can invade the guarantor's private space in order to confiscate his property, and I don't have to go through Beis Din in that case.
First, do that.
Yeah, afilu hamilva atzmo, or afilu hamalva atzmo. Even the malva himself can do this. V'im ariv kablan dino kolova va'aser. But that's only if he's a regular guarantor. But if he's what's called an ariv kablan, what is an ariv kablan? There's two types of guarantors in the Talmudic terminology. One is a regular guarantor, which is that if the debtor cannot pay back the loan, you can come to me as a secondary source of collection. So I went to the debtor. He doesn't have the money. He's completely destitute. So then I'm allowed to go to the guarantor. And Ariv Kablan is even more of a guarantor, which is by signing off this paper, I basically say, not only am I a secondary source of collection, but I'm also a primary source of collection, which means if you creditor prefer to collect the debt directly from me without even going to the debtor, like the debtor has an obligation to pay back the loan in 30 days. If 30 days elapses, you can come straight to me and just take the money. Without even going to the debtor first. That's what an Ariv Kablan is. So in that situation, the Ariv Kablan is no different from the Lova, is no different from the debtor himself, because he's basically put himself in the position of being the primary source of collection, and therefore the halacha reverts to the same limitations as the debtor himself.
Why there's no limitations on the guarantor in that more simple situation? It seems like you have more power over the guarantor than
the debtor. You do. You have more power over the guarantor than you have over the debtor himself. And apparently the reason is because the Torah is worried that a person who put himself in a debt situation is feeling oppressed as it is, and you shouldn't oppress him any further. But a guarantor is not in that same kind of pressure. Yeah. And so, yeah. Right. So there's even an advantage that the creditor has to collect from a guarantor.
So he probably wouldn't have made the loan without the guarantor. That's why the system of the guarantor. He was already worried.
Yeah. In most cases, yeah. Okay. Well, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Let's see how he learns it. B'chov acher. If there's another debt other than from a loan, the iska shuhu palga milvo palga pikadon yesh omrim demuter litvos. He says, what if there's an iska? Now, what is an iska? So we call it a heter iska, right? But really, what it is a structured business arrangement between a creditor and a debtor, where I'm going to give you $100. 50% of it is a loan, and 50% of it is a business investment. That's the way the Gemara structures it, such that, half of that I can't come after you for if you default. I can come after you, but I have to treat it as a loan. And the other half, I'm not restricted as far as I come after you. Well, you'll see in just a second. So the whole iska issue is that you can charge interest on the business part of the investment. So if I give you $100, half is a loan and half is an investment. we can arrange that you'll pay me a return on the half that I've given you as an investment. That's right. So, but since it's partial loan and partial investment, the question is, what are the restrictions? Am I restricted in taking the item from you back from you when you promise that you're going to return it, or the money that I gave you, you promise you're going to give back, but we did a heter iska? Do I have a right to directly invade your home and confiscate your property, or do I have to take it to Beis Din first? So some say that it's okay to do it yourself directly. He says, because since I have a right to take back the half that I gave you as a business investment, where you promised me 100% return, so then since that's a business arrangement where you accrue a debt through a business investment, I'm allowed to invade your property, so I can take all of it, including the loan. But others disagree. Okay, l'mashchano ba'atzmo, you're even allowed to confiscate it yourself. You don't have to go to Beis Din. Rotzelom or litvos miyado bizroa neged ritzona, which means you can actually physically pull it out of his hands against his will. Ba'ayin la'el simen zayin siv chav zayin chav ches de'im zelo guf ha'chefet shenigzal yesh omrim de'ein adam rashai lasos din la'atzmo. We did see before that if this is not the actual item that the guy took from me, let's say I lent him my lawnmower, I can actually physically take the lawnmower back myself, go into his garage and take back my lawnmower. What if it's not the lawnmower that I gave him? He lost my lawnmower. He damaged my lawnmower. And he says, sorry, I can't help you. You're out of luck. It just broke. Well, why did you mow your dog's chew toy? Why did you leave it out on the lawn? Right? That's why my lawnmower broke. Sorry. So the question is, can you confiscate other things of his to make yourself whole? He says, some say that you're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to take back what you originally gave him. But here, what we're saying is, Lamashchano over here doesn't mean you're taking it as payment, but you're taking it as collateral, as a guarantee. So, while it's true that there are some poskim who say that you're not allowed to take back something as payment without going to Beis Din, you would be allowed to confiscate an item of your friends. I'm taking your baseball card collection because you've refused to pay me. And if you want to ever see it again, let's go to Beis Din. And the Beis Din will decide. Because, okay, so that's what we're saying over here, is that you owe me money. It's not because I lent it to you, but rather because I provided you with goods or services. You're now stiffing me. So I've decided to take something of yours. And apparently the halacha does permit me to do so, which is very surprising when you think about it. Okay. Likanes lebeso, ein lael simen zayin sofsif chavches. You're allowed to even go into his house. So what did we see in simen zayin? Let me just. Do you have the sefer with you, Barry? Thank you. Why don't you pass over the sefer to me, and that way we'll just take a quick look at it. Thank you so much. Okay, so Siman Zayin. Yeah, there's nothing like holding a sefer in your hands. Okay, Siman Zayin was Dine Gzela Gneva, laws of stealing and theft. And so in Chavches, the Rav Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. You're not allowed to, he's talking about taking the law into your own hands and exacting justice on your own. You're not allowed to do that under regular circumstances. But he says, Kishanotel keneged mashanotal mimenu. He says, when you just confiscate something that is of the same value as what the guy stole from you, right? V'lo guf hachefetz ba'atzmo shanotal mimenu, and not the actual item that he originally stole from. Avolitol guf hachefetz ba'atzmo shanotel zemimenu. He says, but let's say a guy stole something from you, okay, and you want to get it back. He says, Bein b'gneva, bein b'gzela, mutar litol mimenu bal korcho. You're allowed to just barge into his house and just grab it. And even if he's holding it in his hands, you can pull it out of his clammy claws. The ein ze gozel elamatzel es shalom. And that's not considered stealing. That's considered saving that which belongs to you. V'im hala eno meniach lo litol mutar. Afilu lahakoso ad sheyaniach. And if he doesn't want to let go of it, you're allowed to physically accost him until he relents. You tickle him, right? Okay. If there's no other way to get it out away from him. So you have two kids in the cafeteria one day. The one kid grabs the juice box from the other kid. So the Rebbe sees it and he asks, "What's the halacha?" So the Rebbe says, "Grab it back. He had no right to take that from you. He's a ganav. You have a right to take it back. Fight. Right. Well, so no, that's the question. Can you take his cookies in exchange for the juice box? That's where you're not allowed to take the law into your own hands. You don't have to take him to Beis Din in that situation. He says, because when the actual item that the guy took from you is right there, it's intact, then you're allowed to take the law into your own hands and repossess it from him. Or if someone's trying to steal it. And you're also allowed to protect yourself. If you see you're about to get damaged from someone else, you're allowed to physically use force to protect yourself from harm. Afilu bahaka, even through fisticuffs. Ve'im lo yagia lo shum hefsid, im yelich lebeis din ein tzarich litroach klal. If, however, and even if it's a very easy process to go to Beis Din, you're nonetheless not required to do so. Avolo yelech lebeis hagazon lignov chayfet shelo shema yero elav keganav elim kein yefshel latzilo binyan acher. Then the last thing he writes is, but don't break into the guy's house, because if you break into the guy's house, he may not realize who you are, and he'll pull out a shotgun and shoot you justifiably, because the Torah does give permission for a person to use lethal force against someone who invades his home. So just, unless he says there's no other way to save it, but also realize that you could be taking a risk with your life, so that's basically the halacha.
That's what he said. You can take someone else's different object in order to obtain back the object you rent.
Only as a mashka.
So only as a mashka.
So you can take his cookies, and I'll give you back your cookies when you give me back the juice box.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. So that you would be allowed to do. Okay. So that's all fun and games. All right. Let's see where we are in our campaign. Share the screen. Hold on. We made it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mazel tov.
Which one is important between?
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to close.
Thank you.